Hello Internet, it is BlacKAcESHADE, but for this video I'm going to use my real name. Hi, I am Mitch. I've made some videos like this in the past about what I'm going to talk about today, but a number of things have changed since those videos were made. Today I'm going to talk about my hemihypertrophy, the pain, the problems, doctor visits, all the different tests, and how it's overall affected my life. I also am going to cover some of the more possibly related problems, and the footage I'm going to be using for this video is a collection of photos that I've taken in the past 5 years or so that I've been doing photography. Before I start though, I just want to apologize if there's any background noise or if I mess up any of my words because I tend to do that a lot. For starters, hemihypertrophy, now more commonly known as hemihyperplasia, or hemi for short, is the overgrowth of one side or part of the body, which can affect something as small as a toe or a foot, or it could affect the entire side of the body, including any kind of tissue, bones, muscles, skin, body fat, nerves, and so on. It is present at birth and it is a form of a genetic mutation or mutations. Hemi can be inherited from a child's parent, but it's not always the case. Hemi is different from other genetic illnesses and problems because the specific genes that can lead to the condition vary from person to person compared to some other disorders and illnesses. In my case, the entire left side of my muscular and skeletal structures are completely overgrown. Luckily, as far as I know from the tests and scans in my past, my vital organs are largely not affected. We believe that the hemi is what causes my physical right side chronic pain. So, my birth in early life. When I was born, my vital signs were below what was considered alive, although I was still alive. I was admitted to the NICU with some kind of undetermined infection and survived it as a newborn, after which I was in seemingly good health. My mother would go on to notice a muscle discrepancy in my upper lip and told my doctor, but because I was still so young, everyone thought it would even itself out. However, later in time, this would be a telltale sign of my hemihypertrophy that went unnoticed since it was not causing any kind of pain or problems. I would live most of my early childhood as a normal kid until about the third grade. I was diagnosed with an unspecified learning disorder that would make comprehension of specific things harder for me, and sometimes when instructions or directions were written as plain text and not bulleted or numbered, I might miss a step. Because of this, I would receive special education or extra individual help. I was teased, made fun of, and looked at differently for it. I will go into much more depth of my bullying and depression later on, though. By the time I got to 4th and 5th grade, it would become much harder for me. Both first days of those grades, I went home crying to my parents, saying I did not want to go back to school anymore because it was too hard. This would start the never ending battle of a 504 plan, as well as other accommodations in school. Some teachers would struggle to provide me with the means of that 504 plan, though. 6th grade would be just as much as a struggle as others, but it was when I was 13 in the 7th grade that much of my life would change forever. I was in a science class, writing notes down for the next subject we were going to cover, when out of nowhere I felt an intense searing and tearing sensation in my upper right arm. My arm almost went completely limp and numb. I tried to continue writing and acting as if nothing had happened, but the pain did not stop. Over the course of a few days, the pain did not get any better, so my parents took me to the hospital and the nurse wrote it off as tendinitis and told me to lay off the video games. I knew it wasn't going to be as simple as that, but I did what she said and it still did not get any better. I would eventually get an appointment with my primary care doctor, but he could not pinpoint any specific cause, thus, this would begin my medical journey. Moving into my teenage years, my doctor started with basic x rays of my entire body, an MRI of my head and my neck, and a few other precautionary tests. Every single test would come back clear. Nothing appeared to be out of sorts or anything wrong, as much as that is good to not have anything major like a tumor or cancer. As a 13 or 14-year-old, it was majorly disappointing to still have all this pain and not know what was causing it or how to make it better. How is a young kid supposed to process and understand all of this? This would be about the same time that my parents would start fighting with the school again because of the ongoing physical pain. They would fight for the 504 plan to include extra time to complete any and mostly all assignments, make up days for tests, textbooks for me to use in class and to keep at home to reduce the weight I was carrying that would make the pain worse, and to have a scribe available if necessary at times. There would be some teachers that understood everything going on as much as they could, and they did their best to help me however they could. But there were some teachers that just did not care, and they weren't the best at trying to help me, and it would make my life significantly harder. I spent more time at doctor appointments and having tests done at this point than actually being in school. Some of the first specialists I saw were sports medicine doctors, neurologists, pain management, and physical therapy, and some other doctors that would specialize in the benefits of many different kinds of medications. And I'm sure I am forgetting some other doctors as well. None of the specialists or doctors could figure out anything specific going on with me, but they were just making educated guesses. I have been trialing so many different medications that reached steroid class pain relief and antidepressants with a wide range of possible benefits, but I could not handle the frequent changes with these medications or the side effects, so it kind of felt like a dead end. When my primary care doctor thought we had exhausted as many available resources in the state of Maine, he sent me to Boston Children's Hospital in hopes that maybe they could find something. Anything at all. My parents and I basically started from square one again with redoing some of the most basic tests for different eyes to review. Blood work, EMGs for motor reflexes, x-rays, MRIs, etc. With the EMG, they poked and prodded my arms for hours with needles, sending a low voltage current through the needles into my arms to test my nerves. I felt super sick to my stomach from start to end, and this would later be classified as a traumatic experience for me, so I don't do well with needles, but if it's an absolute must for blood work or a vaccine, then so be it. I'll tough it out. The majority of the tests in Boston resulted in the same as before. However, there was talk of Beckwith-Wiedemann syndrome, which is a different kind of overgrowth syndrome and sometimes can be connected to hemihypertrophy, but there was no conclusive data to confirm it if I had had it or not. When I went back home, my doctor suggested for the time being to try some chiropractic work. Since I had pretty much done everything in between, I said, why not try it? This would be the first time I would have any kind of pain relief. However, it would be hit or miss and very, very short term. A matter of days to weeks before the intensity would ramp up again. For the time being, I would spend time between the chiropractor and physical therapy with little to no progression. When I was about 15 years old, maybe a year or two younger, I was a freshman or sophomore in high school. I still had some baby teeth. I needed to have them pulled out because they were not coming out on their own. When the oral surgeon pulled them out, she happened to notice that the sockets for my teeth on the right side were noticeably a different size than the sockets for my teeth on the left side. She got the basic rundown of my medical history so far, and she tossed out the hemihypertrophy diagnosis for the first time. We took this information to my primary care doctor, and after a long thought process and examination, this became the official diagnosis. Remember when my mother brought up the muscle discrepancy in my upper lip when I was born? That would be the telltale sign, along with the physical examination looking for other affected muscles, such as the cheeks on my face, muscles in my chest and torso, muscles in my back and around my shoulders, and even my legs were considerably different in muscle size. I think the easiest comparison to make is if I put my hands together, you'll see a very noticeable size difference. This would officially become my diagnosis for the physical pain, which was now labeled as physical chronic pain as well, but there is still no real effective way of dealing with the pain. There was and is a chance that something like arthritis is also at play with my right arm and hand, but that has never really been examined or pursued. What would come next was osteopathic work. I cannot remember who or how it was recommended, but it's basically a more advanced chiropractor who works to keep the bones effectively in place. That specialist found that part of my brachial plexus on my right side of the body was strained and being pulled in multiple directions. So, as I've been calling it for years, he worked his witchcraft and magic to relax it into a more normal position and that brought more regular pain relief. However, this would not be the end. The more he did it, the more frequent my body would fight back. He tried multiple different methods to keep my body and bones in place, but like the chiropractic work, it was very short term, a matter of days, if that, to maybe a week or two. I would graduate high school in 2012, but just barely. My senior year was probably the biggest struggle I had had at the time. I was suffering from severe depression, which is something I'll talk about very soon, which just made going to school a massive chore. To make things easier, my in school guidance counselor was changed, and the new one made it so I only had classes on one day, and two of them were study halls, for a total of 4 classes a day. For reference, our school would flip between a blue and a white day with 4 classes in one day. One day you would go to a specific set of classes on the blue day, and on a different specific set of classes on the white day every other day. Since my core classes were moved to one day, I could go to school every other day. It did help me out, and it helped reduce my stress, but it didn't happen until about midway through my senior year, and by then I had already failed a semester of government history and English. I was able to make up the English credit after school, and lucky for me, my English teacher has been a family friend for quite some time, and she has been very understanding of my medical problems. So if it wasn't for having her as a teacher, I probably wouldn't have even bothered to try. The government credit could not be made up after school and would require summer school for the first time ever for myself. That was when we found out I was also missing an elective credit, which could also easily be made up. The elective credit was done super quick and easy, but the government credit was a little bit harder. There was coursework to do online, but I would have to go in school to do the actual tests, and within the first week or two of summer school, I had made up both credits and was all set to graduate. Although I did not graduate with the rest of my class in the regular ceremony, I still got my diploma over a GED, and for obvious reasons, my grades immensely suffered because of all the time I had missed because of the pain, problems, doctor visits, and all the testing. After high school and entering into my young adult life, very little happened from 2014 to 2014, nor had anything really changed for the worse or for the better. When I had an appointment with my primary care doctor, he mentioned that he had just recently seen a patient that was having somewhat similar problems as mine and had went to a pain rehab clinic in Minnesota to help deal with it. With proper authorization from my side and from the other patient's side, we met up. It would turn out that my father and his mother knew each other from their college days. The four of us met up for lunch, and they talked about the clinic and their experiences there, and from what they had to say about their experiences and the help that he got, it seemed like it would be the best opportunity for me to go as well. Plans were put into motion for me to go to this clinic to see if they could help me as well. This was pretty much my last resort. There was nothing left that we knew that could really help me out. In April to May of 2014, my father and I would travel to Rochester, Minnesota to participate in Mayo Clinic's PPRC, or Patient Pain Rehabilitation Center. This program they run is to help manage and cope with chronic pain or pains and or POTS, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, which is a form of autodysnomia. This affects the blood circulation and nervous system, which in turn affects the heart rate, blood pressure, sweating, and body temperature of a person. This causes specific symptoms to occur when standing and when doing other things as well. I was never diagnosed with it, but the majority of other kids in my class or my group were. For them, it's just as debilitating and much like chronic pain. The normal duration of the program is 3.5 weeks. There are plenty of hotels, apartments for rent, places to eat, and things to do outside of the hospital network. The usual day in the program consists of early morning stretches to relax and loosen up the body, which, to my surprise, actually really helped. There were a handful of days that my body felt very uptight, tired, and sore, whether from not sleeping well or from the previous day's activities. After the stretching, the morning would consist of different classes and lessons trying to help teach kids different ways to cope and to manage their pain and their symptoms as best as they could. Things such as deep breathing to put your focus on something good, organizing as much of your day or days as possible, structuring out your days as much as possible, among many other coping mechanisms and other methods. Some classes were also combined with their parents and their kid to teach information all at once or to help build cohesion among the kid and their parent. Parents also had their own classes and lectures to try and better help their kid. At some point within the day, the class would break up into two different groups. One group would go to the physical therapy part of the program and work on different and various other exercises and goals there. The other group would go to occupational therapy and learn better ways to cope with going back to school, preparing for college, life goals, and generally trying to live a better lifestyle. I found myself in a very awkward position. At the time of me going to the clinic, I was turning 20 years old. I had already graduated from high school and I had no plans for further education. My pain, depression, and problems had limited me so much I felt like I was physically disabled. Most of the other kids in my group were between the ages of 12 to 17 and still in high school, so when they went back home, wherever home was for them, they would transition back into school and continue their lives. But for me, I was already past that point, which kind of put me in a very weird position. After the physical therapy and the occupational therapy, we would come back for another class. Then the group would break for an hour for lunch. We would come back for another group class or continue from where we left off. Then the group would then split up again, with the smaller groups going back to physical therapy and occupational therapy, whichever they hadn't done earlier in the morning. After that class, we would go to recreational therapy to relax and decompress after the day, which could be long, tough, and hard. Recreational therapy consisted of simple recreational sports and activities such as team sports, board games, arts and crafts, anything of those sorts to bring us all together closer and to work together for social interactions. Some of them were enjoyable and some of them I didn't really care much for. Throughout the day, you could be pulled away from the group for any individual needs, specific treatments, discussions, or anything else in particular. On some days and in specific classes, specialists from the hospital would come in to talk about betterment of life, such as nutrition experts, psychiatrists, pretty much anyone and everyone from the Mayo Clinic to cover as many different fields and problems as possible. In my own experience between my two Mayo Clinic visits, I was pulled out for concerns of my weight. At the time of my first visit, I was 20 years old and I weighed 120 pounds. And now in 2021, I am 27 at 219 pounds. They sat me down in private conversations to discuss the best possible ways to try and increase my weight because it was low and very concerning. Their solution was for me to eat at least three things at every meal: the main meal, something on the side, and a nutritional drink of some kind. I was also pulled out to try and work on college applications, which did not go very well for me for various different reasons. I was also pulled out to work on my depression and my anxiety, which, needless to say, did not help at all that much. The program is very strict, and that is how they make their teachings and their methods work. They hard press those teachings and methods very hard, and if you don't follow their rules or you fight them back, they can and they will bump you out of their program. After all, there are a lot of people out there that do need their help. I was nearly bumped out twice because I'm one of those people that wear shorts in the winter because that's just who I am. Also, maybe because I've lived my entire life in Maine. Of course, if it's freezing outside, I will wear pants. I'm not that crazy after all. I was starting to be kicked out if I did not wear pants over my shorts, so to please them, I wore pants for maybe 2 days, and that was enough for them. Also, as a motivational kicker, they also threatened to kick me out if I did not continue to gain weight, so I did my best to eat as much as I possibly could and as often as I possibly could. When they would do the daily weigh ins, even if I was only gaining a single pound, that was good enough to keep me in the program. The program would go from about 8 or 9 in the morning to about 3 or 4 in the afternoon. After that, we were free to do whatever we wanted, and usually most nights the parents did their best to keep all the kids together to get them to bond. So there was a lot of home cooking and home cooked meals, going out to eat, and nightly and weekend activities such as bowling, laser tag, movie nights, weekend movies, or just kind of all sitting around talking about ourselves and what it was like at home. During my first clinic trip, for the first week or so, we had only two boys in our group. Me being one of them, and another boy who was about 15 years old. All the other kids in our class were girls, and there were about 13 of them to the two boys. It was incredibly awkward for me because most of my teenage life I missed out on having a social life because of all the time missed in school. So it made it very, very, very hard and difficult for me to talk to just about any and everyone, especially girls. It was very difficult leaving the clinic. The sole reason being I had finally met people that were going through somewhat similar experiences to me. They knew the difficulties of chronic pain, the problems, POTS, and other problems and symptoms of not having a quote normal end quote life. Both of my groups were from all over the US, with the closest person living in New Jersey. I did my best to try and stay in touch with most of these people through text messages, social media, and even trying to video chat with them, but most of us have all parted ways. After returning from Mayo Clinic, I applied to work at a local grocery chain, and my job was what they called a carryout. I made sure that they made note of my chronic pain, but it did not take very long for the problems to begin. I assisted in bagging groceries, helping people take them to their vehicles if necessary, collecting the shopping carts and returning them inside, and lumping all the other crappy jobs together. On holidays such as the 4th of July, I found myself working alone and there were not enough shopping carts going back into the store than coming out, so there were a lot of people that needed them and were not getting them. So I could not keep up with the demand by myself. Their rules stated that no one should be pushing more than 4 carts at any time, but because people were so desperate for them, what choice did I have? I was pushing between 8 and 10 of them. It was painful and very, very heavy. My right knee buckled from doing all of that work that day, and I felt a hard crack rip through the inside of my knee. I did my best to finish my shift and let my boss know. They sent me to the urgent care facility that they are contracted with. They tested and examined my knee but could not determine any kind of problem. I would just continue on with the pain, some days being better or worse than others, but I found it harder and harder to work. Especially by myself, and my superiors became less and less accommodating and understanding of my problems, which they had already knew about before they even hired me. It got out of hand very quickly, and I ended up quitting my job on the spot. My knee pain and problems would continue to persist. I would eventually go on to see an orthopedic doctor who did an MRI, and they still could not find any kind of damage to my knee or surrounding muscles or bones. So it's just been filed under the chronic pain category. Not very long after quitting my job, I would go back to the Mayo Clinic for a second time for a refresher course. The refresher course usually lasted from a week to 2 weeks, but varied from person to person and their issues. I tried to utilize the methods I had learned from my first time there to carry on with my life, but it was just not working out for me. The news of going back to the clinic created some backlash. It put my parents' plans out of whack, and the people I was still in touch with from my first group from the clinic did not really agree with me going back, but that doesn't really matter now. My father and I would road trip to Minnesota, which was kind of the eye opener for my photography. We traveled from Maine to Buffalo, New York, and saw the Niagara Falls, then to Indiana and to Minnesota, seeing some extended family and a former first group member who lived relatively close by to the clinic. When we got there, there were some pretty big changes going on. The facilities were in a midlife renovation, but the way the kids and the parents were doing things also drastically differed from only a couple of months from before. The second visit was in November of 2014. Now the groups of kids and parents were separating themselves into different cliques or groups based on their social standings. The parents were kind of doing their own thing as well. My nurse told me what was happening and wanted my father and I to combine into our respective groups and put them back together again. We did not really want to do it, but we didn't really have a choice. Because of my weight problems and some of the other things that came up, they had me stay longer, so it ended up being nearly a full 3 week stay anyway. This time around, it probably was the hardest for me, but I also think I learned the most about myself. In order for me to go back to the clinic, they had me go talk to people at a former local college and apply to it. I held up to my end of the deal, but by the time I got to the clinic, they had changed their terms on me. They now had me calling and applying to as many local colleges as possible, and they also wanted me to stay on campus and to come up with what I wanted to do all practically right on the spot. I honestly did not know what to do. I did what they wished and I applied, trying to think of what I wanted to do with my life. I drew so many blanks until I came up with nursing, ironically, at least at first. I figured I wanted to try and help people, especially people that were in very similar situations to me, but college wasn't something I could do. I don't really have the patience anymore, or the tolerance, or the smarts to tackle college and the misery of homework and studying. So I half assed it the rest of the program in that regard. One of the more positive things to come out this time from the time I spent at the clinic was a P450 test. This takes a swab of your saliva, and through your saliva, the test can determine what kind of drugs and medications your body can process better or worse than some others. In my case, for my depression, which, sorry, I still have yet to talk about that, it was for antidepressants, and it had three columns from left to right medications that could work better than others, then use with caution, or do not use at all. This would also reveal that I am more susceptible to side effects and that they hit me harder and faster than, quote, average, end quote. This would, over some time, help me find the right antidepressant for me, and I've been on it for a good 8 years or so now. This time around at the clinic, I tried to be more careful with my social life. I had recognized some problems I had had with the first group I had been a part of, but to this day, I still have problems with social interactions. It was, and still is, incredibly hard for me to look at people when talking to them or when they're talking to me, and it's just as difficult to keep a conversation going or to keep their interest. I felt like a helpless puppy because I was stripped of something that every kid and teenager should have, a social life. I just did not know what to do, and I did not really understand myself, and I was trying to figure out who I was, and I think that was the greatest thing I took away from Mayo Clinic and my interactions with all of those different people. There are details I will spare, but over time I found myself to love and admire babies, even if I'm not so good with them. I love animals of all kinds and sorts, and I know I have an overly caring heart, which may be my greatest weakness, and I'm a pretty boring, simple, and easy to please goofball. Finally, moving into my depression, my experiences at Mayo Clinic and living life back at home also taught me hard lessons and gave me painful scars throughout the years. Because of my overly caring heart and lack of social experiences, I have and continue to put way too much effort into trying to make friendships and relationships work, when those people may not even care at all or feel the same way. People still left when they promised that they would not. I've been replaced, forgotten, used, treated very poorly, ignored, felt worthless, felt empty, hopeless, taken advantage of. It made to feel like I was never good enough, indirectly or directly by all sorts of people. I feel like no matter how hard I try, what I do, big, small, new, or different, I will always be stuck in this hole that never seems to fill up or get shallower. I've attempted suicide multiple times throughout my life, luckily never far enough to be lethal or for hospitalization. These feelings are almost always present, constant, and never ending. I have tried to talk about all of this and share my feelings and experiences about my depression, but that has just sent a lot of people running away and never talking to me ever again, which isn't really the best way to handle these kinds of things, but we all handle things differently, and some people just don't know how to handle or process that kind of information. Looking back on my life and all the hardships and challenges, I would wager to guess that my depression probably started when I was in the fifth grade, when I was really struggling with school and trying to make friends. I never really felt like I fit in anywhere or belonged anywhere. I always felt like an outcast and alone. I was bullied and teased for needing special education and not really fitting in because of it, and having different interests than most of my other peers at that time. It drove me to further isolate myself and not really talk to or associate myself with anyone. Those feelings as a young kid are crippling, and I did not really know that at that time or what I was feeling. With the medical problems beginning only a few years later, it was extremely difficult for me to understand what I felt, who I was, or to process any of what I was going through, and because very little of it actually shows on the outside, no one could really tell or understand what it felt like to be in my shoes. So maybe that's why I am so misunderstood by people, and because of the lack of the social experiences. When I did not think things could get any better for me, I came home from an appointment one evening and I saw wild daisies growing in the backyard. I thought they looked nice and pretty, so I went over to them and took a photo of them with my cell phone. I posted that photo online and people started claiming I had an eye for photography. The following weekend, my aunt and uncle let me borrow their Nikon camera, and from there, I fell in love with photography. I bought my first Nikon camera shortly after that weekend experience. I never thought I'd be that kind of person to get into photography. I never really had anything against it. I just never thought that'd be something that suited me. I had taken a black and white photo class in high school using a film camera, and I liked taking photos, but not so much the developing photos part. I did not have any experience or knowledge of digital cameras, so I taught myself as best as I could. Nature and landscape photography is what I have found to enjoy doing the most. However, I was roped into doing swim photography for my dad's high school swim team that he coaches during the winter. I knew absolutely nothing about swim photography and just how hard it would be on me in terms of the physicality and how hard it would be to get the right angles, lighting, and timing. But I've been at it for a good 6 years or seasons, but it's continued to take its toll on my body. I do everything I can to stretch, keep good postures, and everything in between, but constantly being low to the ground and on my knees really takes its toll. This has cranked up the osteopathic visits 5 or 6 times in 3 or so months, but because I've enjoyed doing the swim photography and trying to create keepsakes for the swimmers, their coaches, schools, and their parents, it's been worth the additional pain. This is where all the new stuff really starts. So, further problems. In 2017, the left side of my jaw would develop a cracking, popping, and painful sensation when eating, yawning, and overall just moving my mouth. It was painful to eat and chew in just about any and every kind of motion. I ended up seeing an oral surgeon and he saw signs of TMJ and he performed a procedure to ease and possibly even fix the TMJ. After the procedure, which was injecting some kind of fluid, which, in quotes, lubricant, into my jaw to get it moving, my jaw was mostly fine. Sometime last year in 2020, the popping came back and became very painful to the point that the right side of my jaw was also being affected. I saw the oral surgeon again and he said that there was nothing left that he could do. Reviewing the x-rays, the bone structures for both sides of my mouth, it was clearly visible that the left side was being affected by the hemihypertrophy. The local dentist would also concur, but there was little to nothing anyone can really do about it. I would find myself in a relatively good place, physically speaking, for about the next year and a half or so. I would find myself enjoying my photography work and trying to find peace for myself. My life would further change July 22nd of 2019. I hit the very top of my head on a shelf while backing out of the bathroom closet, but I didn't feel any pain or symptoms until about a week later. I never blacked out or bled, but I started feeling symptoms, and it would be dizziness, tiredness, raw pain, headaches, and migraines. One night, I was massaging the top of my head while in bed, and I felt a very sharp pain or crack go through the very top of my skull. It felt like my head wanted to explode from the pressure, and at that point, I started having full blown concussion symptoms such as memory loss, forgetfulness, lightheadedness, raw pain, further headaches, and migraines as well. I wasn't able to see any doctors for about 2 months after it had happened for various reasons. It was not until I would go and see the osteopath to have other bones put back into place that I would tell them about the symptoms I was having, what exactly had happened, and he would diagnose me with a concussion. He would do what he could for me to relieve as many of the symptoms and the pain as possible, but there was not much else I could do but rest and hope it would get better. It was not until last October in 2020 that I would be able to see a neurologist who agreed that it was a concussion, and after others had played it off as nothing major but just headaches and to lay off the caffeine. I would trial three medications, the first being a muscle relaxer that would help calm down everything, which didn't really help for very long. The second would be an anti-seizure medication that with known migraine relief benefits, so I tried that and got 3 pills into it. Started having severe side effects and had to stop. At this time, something else would occur, but I'll come back to that. The third medication that I'm currently on is a stronger muscle relaxer that should not have any interactions with other medications and for the most part has helped with the migraines and the headaches, but I still have major issues with dizziness, memory loss, forgetfulness, and some other symptoms. I also had an MRI done of my brain, but that did not show any kind of trauma to my skull or to my brain, which is always a good thing. But because it did not show any kind of trauma, it is also hard to diagnose a proper course of treatment. Right now, this is labeled as post concussion syndrome because of the symptoms of the concussion have not stopped, so it's like always having a concussion. It has further changed my life drastically because I am not able to do some of the things I love, like doing photography or traveling with my parents to see other parts of the family or just travel at all. A lot of things I used to like doing, I cannot do anymore or have extreme difficulty in trying to do. It is also possible that my hemihypertrophy has affected the post concussion syndrome if my skull or even my brain is overgrown in any capacity, which it probably is, but to what effect it remains unknown. I try to do my best I can, but most days it's very little. I have overthought myself into anxiety attacks and near mental breakdowns because I have no idea how I am supposed to live my life the way it currently is. I am supposed to be physically disabled but have been denied disability 3 times because I have a very small work history, but because I can't work, I guess I am just royally screwed. I have been lucky enough to be able to stay under my parents' care and their insurance, even though I wish I could be independent. Going back to the problem the second medication caused, I started having chest pain and breathing problems in April of 2021. It felt like I had a weight on my chest and I couldn't ever catch my breath. I would go to urgent care about a month later, and they screened me for COVID. They did 2 EKGs of my heart, took chest x rays, and took blood samples, and everything would come back clean and clear, but the pain and the breathing problems have, and as per standard and usual by now, have continued. Some days are better than others, some days are worse because of the humidity or just because. This has also further greatly limited my capacities to do much of anything, and even going up and down stairs at minimum make the problems worse. And even talking through this video has made it even more difficult. I did end up seeing and talking to my doctor about this, and he calls it air hunger. I was supposed to have a breathing test done, and someone would call me to schedule that, but nothing such has happened in the last 3 months. So I continue to do what I can at best and survive under the extreme chronic pain, and the pain and the problems just continue to persist. The final things I have to say is study your family medical history, and not just for hemihypertrophy, but for any kind of other problems, because if you or a loved one is born with any kind of genetic disorder, it has the potential to make other smaller conditions even worse, and especially increased risks of any kind of cancers. Monitor your body or your child's body for any kind of muscle discrepancies and take them seriously if they say they feel pain and pain anywhere at all. Stay informed and consult your doctors when and if necessary. Hemi is always going to be different for each and every person, so I'm lucky that affects my muscles and my bones, and only causes physical pain, because I have talked to a few people across the world that have cancer and organ problems from Hemi, and I have no idea what that might be like for them, and their risks and complications of dying are extremely higher than mine. We as human beings need to respect and be supportive as possible for the battles that each and every one of us has gone through and continues to go through, because we never know what it's like until something happens and it changes our lives completely. Be kind, be supportive, be respectful, and try to be understanding. No one wants to ever feel like they're alone in any kind of battle or medical problem at all. But this basically sums up most of my life, my experiences with hemihypertrophy, chronic pain, problems, and my challenges. Hopefully, it is helpful or can be useful to someone out there, anywhere at all. My name is Mitch, and until next time, goodbye, Internet.